So our main investment wise is
Сайн байцгааны хүн төлөвлөгчтэй. Тэрийн де факто нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор бид хүчтэй болж чадах уу? Үзэл бодлын хувь чадалтай байж чадах уу? Энийг судалснаар ойлгосноор.
welcome to Mongolia.
Здравствуйте. Зүрхийг ингээд зогсоогоо тэрийг задлаа тэрэн дээр ажилладаг хүн бодвол хүний амьдралын үнцнийг өөрөөр хардаг байх л да. Та юу гэж бодож байна энэ тухай? Нэгдүгээр Монгол улсын тэтгэврийн сан хаа байна? Энэ улсын төр засгийн өөрийнхөө төрийн имчилгээний системд итгэхгүй юм бол яаж энэ хүмүүсийн ажлыг хийх юм бэ? Тийм учраас манай иргэдийн хяналтыг хийх ёстой байж тээ.
Яруу найр нь бичдэг. Тэр дотроо та ганцаардахгүй гэж бичсэн байна. Тэр ямар учиртай? Та ганцаардаад байна. Энийг ингээд за яг хийе гэсэн юм механизм байна уу юу? Байхгүй таны хийлгэж чадахгүй юу? Хөгжил дэвшлийн гол асуудлаар дэлхийн болон Монголын нөлөө бүхий хүмүүстэй таныг уулзуулна. Үндэсний дэлгэцээр жаргал сайхан де факто. Сайн байцгаана уу хүн үзэгчтэй. Өнөөдөр манай де факто нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор Америкийн нэгдсэн улсын ардчилал, хүний эрх, хөдөлмөр хариуцсан төрийн нарийн бичгийн дарга ноён Том Малиновски оролцож байна. Good evening.
Good evening.
1 year ago, we have met in Tallinn at a meeting of a community for democracy. Freedom Online meeting in Tallinn, and it elapsed 1 year now. And how do you think this movement had achieved? What kind of things it had achieved during the last 1 year?
I'm not sure what we've achieved in the last year, but I know that we have achieved something in the last maybe 25 years, which happens to be the amount of time that Mongolia has been a democracy, but also about the amount of time that we've had an internet. And we have achieved something that is a real miracle. We have created a shared community of information that encompasses the whole world, where people in a rural area of Mongolia have access to the same information that people in New York have, and in London, and in Delhi, and in every free country that has access to this medium. And preserving that amazing thing is the job of the Freedom Online Coalition. And I guess our achievement is that we've preserved it for another year.
Freedom Online, and also it has to do with privacy, and it caused several issues on the other side of the equation. How do you think, what do you think about that privacy part of
the privacy
freedom on the internet?
Is extremely important. Part of what gives people the security to be able to talk to one another about anything, about controversial issues, about difficult issues, the security to challenge those in power who need to be held accountable.
That's the part of democracy.
Which is a big part of democracy, but you also need a reasonable expectation that when you're talking to your friends, to your neighbors, to your political colleagues, to people who you're organizing with in your community, that the police is not going to be snooping in on you. Many people are also worried about private companies invading their privacy, although I think it's fair to say that what concerns people most is when it's the government, because the government has the power to take away our freedom. And yet at the same time, and this is why this issue is so complicated, we do expect our government to be using its powers to conduct surveillance, to spy on criminals, on people who may be threatening to do violence in our society, terrorists and others. And so balancing those two expectations is a challenge that every democratic country that has the internet faces today. And we've dealt with that challenge, sometimes struggled with it in the United States. And I would say we are finding the right balance, but I'm not sure if we have resolved the question yet.
The same is here in Mongolia. We, the civic society in this country want to have this strong tool as a way of having the government to be more transparent, which we believe that because it is not transparent, our progress could be not that as much as we would like to see.
Yeah. Every year at this time, we reflect on the state of press freedom around the world. We honor the sacrifices made by journalists who have lost their lives or been threatened or imprisoned for doing their job. So, as we thank journalists for their work, we also call on governments to recognize the universal right to free expression, both online and offline. A free press keeps people informed and holds government accountable, so we can't govern without it, not democratically, not honestly. This is, I think, as true today as it's ever been in the past. Now, it's true that a lot has changed in our global media environment in the last few years. In many developed democracies, there are fewer and fewer daily newspapers. More and more people are getting their information from social media. But whenever I hear about a journalist who is attacked or threatened or censored somewhere in the world, it reminds me just how important journalism is. If it wasn't important, why would dictators and thugs and tyrants and terrorists go to the trouble of going after journalists? In this sense, the death of journalists, as tragic as it is proof that the death of journalism, something that commentators in my country sometimes talk about it, is a myth. It is also, of course, those tragedies, a call to action for all countries who are committed to human rights. At the State Department last week, we launched our annual Free the Press campaign, in which every day for about a week we highlight cases of individual reporters who have been imprisoned wrongly in countries all over the world. One of them is Gao Yu, a 71-year-old journalist in China. She was arrested last year, forced to make a televised confession, and sentenced to 7 years in jail. In Syria, Mazen Darwish remains imprisoned by the Assad regime for trying to expose that regime's brutal atrocities. In Vietnam, Ta Quang Tan continues to serve a 10-year sentence for unmasking corruption. In Ethiopia, Riyad Alemu was arrested for writing an article critical of the Ethiopian government and remains in prison under terrorism charges, terrorism for writing an article. On Friday, 2 days ago, we did something else to honor these kinds of journalists. We invited 3 who had been censored or detained in their countries, Russia, Ethiopia, and Vietnam, to the White House, not for some ceremony, not to give them a prize, but to give them the thing that I think most journalists in the world would do anything to get, a personal, exclusive interview with the President of the United States. So that's part of our message to governments that would try to go after, arrest, or threaten journalists. You do that, they'll get an exclusive interview with the President of the United States. Good message, I think. We've included more details about these brave journalists on our humanrights.gov website at the State Department. We've tweeted about them using the hashtag @FreeThePress. So I encourage all of you to share these stories with your community, whether that's by retweeting or drafting articles or blogs, or, if you must, reverting to that old-fashioned form of communication. Tell your family and friends.
Бидний өнөөдрийн хүрсэн амжилтыг гаргасан цаасаа дүгнэх юм бол бид нэлээд өндөр амжилтанд хүрсэн байна. Цаасан дээр бид нар бол нэлээд олон шинэ үндсэн хуулиас эхсүүлээд хүний эрх хэрэгчлөө, хэвлэлийн эрхчлөөний талаар чухал заалтууд бүгдээрээ бичигдэж, батлагдаж өдийг хүрсэн. Гэхдээ яг өнөөдөр амьдрал дээр ямар байна вэ? Зөвхөн өнөөдөр нээлттэй нийгэм хүрээлэнгийн хэвлэлийн эрхчлөөний шагналыг авсан сэтгүүлч одоо эрдэнэ цэцгийн кейсийг аваад үзэхэд одоо зүгээр л нэг Азийн дугаарыг наймаалцж байгаа тухай жижигхэн сурвалжлагын төлөө тэр хүн 2 жил шүүх цагдаагаар эрүүгийн хэрэг үүсгэдэг. Ингээд 2 жил бол явсан байж байгаа. Тэгэхээр өнөөдөр зүгээр л төрийн дундаж албан байгууллагыг шүүмжлэхэд сэтгүүлч яг ингээд шоронд ороогүй ч гэсэн тийм хэмжээний бол тамлалт гэж хэлээ тийм ээ. Тийм зовлонтой байдалд бол өнөөдөр хүрч байгаа. Тийм учраас өнөөдөр одоо 25 жилийн Монголын ардчилал биднэрт тийм үзэл санааны чиг зүгийг бол сайхан зааж өгсөн боловч тэрэнд хүрэх бодит алхмуудыг бол хараахан бий болгож чадаагүй байгаа. Биднэрт бол маш их хийх зүйл байгаа. Хамгийн түрүүнд бид нар өнөөдөр одоо ямар нэгэн байдлаар хэтэрхий энэ жижигхэн зах зээл дээр маш олон хэвлэл мэдээллийн байгууллага байна гэж шүүмжлэнгүүтэл яаж энийг хумх уу гэдэг тийм хамгийн түрүүнд тийм контролдох тийм шийдвэрт эрх баригчид хүрэх гэж оролддог. Гэтэл өнөөдөр үнэн чанартай яг тэр шийдвэрийг гаргах гэж байгаа их хурлын гишүүд нь өөрсдөө энэ олон хэвлэл мэдээллийн хэрэгслүүдийн эзэд нь нууц эзэд нь байж байгаа. Тийм учраас дээрэс нь өнөөдрийн манай парламентэд ямарваа нэгэн одоо гаргаж байгаа хуулийнхаа өмнө олон нийтийн одоо хэлэлцүүлэг улс суурьтай судалгаа шинжилгээ хийж асуудал ханддаг юм практик хууль хийхин тулд ажиллах тийм регуляшн нь бол тогтож чадаагүй байна. Тэгэхээр ийм нөхцөлд өнөөдөр 25 жилийн туршид чөлөөтэй байж байгаа үндсэн хуулийн тэр чиг заалтын дагуу чөлөөтэй байж байгаа өдий хүрчсэн энэ зүйлийг бол өнөөдөр хэвлэлийн эрхчлөөний хуулийг энэ парламент төгс сайхан гаргаад ингээд манай одоо медиа орчин сайхан болно гэдэгт бол итгэхийн аргагүй байгаа. Тийм учраас өнөөдрийн парламентэд сууж байгаа гишүүд нууц одоо эзэмшлээ илт хот болгоогүй байгаа цагт судалгаа шинжилгээтэйгээр хуулийг гаргах гэж оролддог болоогүй цагт хэвлэлийг зүгээр л орхих гэж би бол уриалах гэдэг юм. Битээ энэ одоо хэвлэл мэдээллийн асуудал дээр хууль гаргах гэж ямар нэгэн дүрм журам тогтоох гэж оролдоо. Бид нар үндсэн хуулийнхаа чиг баримжаагаар өөрийнхөө редакцийнхаа дотоод дүрм журмаар өөрөө өөрсдөө ингээд хөгжөөд явах бүрэн боломж бол өнөөдөр Монголын хэвлэл мэдээлэлд байгаа гэдгийг хэлэх гэж байна.
Well, I think there are some rules, and Freedom Online Coalition is a good place to discuss what the rules ought to be in democratic countries. So one rule I think we all can and should agree on is that when the government uses its power to monitor what people do, what we do online, it should never use that power to try to control or limit the exercise of rights that are guaranteed under international law. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the freedom of assembly to come together to do peaceful political activities. So we shouldn't do what China does or Russia does when it monitors people's conduct on the internet so that it can suppress political opposition.
What is that important, most intrinsic thing that our government is not doing the same things what our neighbors do, as you have described?
That the Mongolian government.
Yeah, I mean in the future, in whatever under whatever circumstances.
Well, I think it's especially important for Mongolia because, after all, this is what distinguishes Mongolia. This is what makes Mongolia stand out in this neighborhood. Even though Mongolia is a small country by population, it has a much larger influence and much larger stature because it has a reputation for respecting human rights and democratic principles. And I would argue it's good in terms of the respect that Mongolia carries in the world, but it's also good for you economically because, after all, if I'm a foreign investor and I have a choice between going to a really big, powerful country with a big market like China or Russia, where there's corruption and repression, And a really small country with a much smaller market, like Mongolia, if it also had corruption and repression, obviously the choice would be easy. I would go to the bigger.
Yeah,
right?
these countries are our biggest market, closest market, and
Well,
we
that
have
you
to
can't-
deal with that.
That you can't have, of course, and no one is suggesting otherwise. But I'm saying that these institutions you have of rule of law, democracy, transparency, as you build them, they become the reasons why foreign investors and others will come to Mongolia. Because otherwise there's not much reason to come here as against your neighbors. And in fact, there are many more reasons to go to your neighbors because they're so much bigger and their economies are much bigger. So what Mongolia's got that will, I think, make it distinctive and make it successful and make it so attractive to people, including investors from around the world, are these institutions. And so it's so important to keep growing them and to preserve and improve where there is a need for improvement in respect for democratic principles and rule of law.
You have been meeting a media representative of the country, and you have seen certain issues like defamation, like restricting certain freedom of speech on the internet, closing some internet websites. What is your take on that?
I've seen this in almost every young democracy around the world. The first thing you do is people are very idealistic and they say we need freedom, and so they create a free media. And then they realize that a lot of this new free media, well, it's not always 100% responsible. And sometimes the power of government to control media is replaced by the power of those with money to control media. That's very common. And so I would say that it takes time. 25 years is not a lot in the lifetime of a country. You've got to develop a political culture, set of expectations among the population for doing things in the right way, for telling the truth, for responsible journalism. And to have that culture enforced by the media itself and by the consumers of the media, the people out there who are listening, who are paying to be consumers. I think it would be a big mistake to go back to a system where it's the government that's deciding what is good media and what is bad media, or judges who have the power to send you to prison, deciding what is good media and what is bad media. In my country, those of us in government tend to think that bad media is the media that criticizes us.
Okay.
And it really feels like they've got it wrong and they're telling lies, but you know what? Sometimes it's true, but sometimes we're just angry because they're criticizing us. So we don't think we should have the power to decide who should be shut down or put in prison or monitored.
But yet there are countries where they have a so-called media freedom laws. How do you find these laws? Is it really needed, or?
I'm a little bit skeptical. Of course, we want to see what's in the law before we.
You don't have
say
such
anything.
a law.
We don't have anything called a media freedom law. We do have. There are some things, for example, for broadcasting, for public broadcasting, because the airwaves are limited. There are certain frequencies, and they have to be allocated. Well, it's natural for government to play a role there, and the important thing is, in those limited areas where government in the United States plays a role in regulating the media marketplace, the absolute rule is you can never use that power to favor one media or one outlet over another based on what they write and what they say. And that, I think, is pretty strictly enforced in the United States.
How do you regulate this defamation, so-called?
Defamation?
Yes,
We
defamation.
have civil libel, not criminal libel in the United States.
Okay, like in Mongolia, we have a criminal libel.
You have criminal libel, which I tend to think is not a good idea. That I don't think the answer to this problem, and there is a problem, no question about it, but I don't think the answer is to send reporters to jail, because I think that's a power that can be abused to deter unfavorable coverage of.
That's
of
the case sometimes
yeah.
here.
So civil libel, I think, is a better way. And we also have a special rule in the United States that's a little bit different from most democracies. And the rule is that if you are a public figure, a famous politician, or maybe a famous actor or actress, somebody who's known to the public, the standard you have to meet to prove libel is higher. So if you're a politician, to sue somebody for libel, you have to prove not only that they told a lie, but that they knew that they were telling a lie. It's very hard to do, to prove what somebody was thinking, to prove that they were conscious that what they were saying was a lie.
It's very hard.
Very hard, and we want it to be hard, because we generally don't think that the best solution, even to dishonest reporting, is the law. The best solution, we think, is to fight the falsehood with truth. And of course, our politicians have many ways of fighting back by telling their side of the story. And we think that that's a better way of dealing with that problem.
What you would do, or do you have such cases where politicians own huge network of media outlet that can impact other in any ways they want to see?
Well, that has happened in American history before. When we were talking before, I was telling the story about our President Lyndon Johnson, who famously owned a network of radio stations. I think actually people may not have known it at the time, not everyone in America. But
there were not disclosure on that.
There was very little disclosure in the 1960s in American politics of anything, of campaign donations, of what government officials owned. That has all changed. So no, I don't believe that that is the case anymore. I think it really couldn't be, but mostly because the political culture has developed, so that if it were to happen, I think people would consider that to be not ethical, and they wouldn't vote for somebody who
even
did that.
I understand that your politicians will declare if they own a particular shares of a company about which they may have or they would have any decisions by voting.
They are legally required to disclose that, and in fact, all senior government officials in the United States are. I have to. If you want to know what I own, I think there's a website where you can
check.
Find out. Yeah.
Well, this is the culture we are trying to, and we believe that we can do it, and in that way we can increase the transparency in our government. Yet we have still several issues, like, for example, Mongolians are not very happy with the information we receive about political party financing, campaign financing, which is very much skewed, very much decreased. What do you think about that?
That's an issue that we're still struggling with in the United States. We have tried to limit campaign financing over the years, and there's still a very big debate in America about whether that is an appropriate thing to do. Many people think that we have to have strict limits because otherwise there will be corruption in politics, influence. Others, including now a majority of the judges on our Supreme Court, have argued that campaign donations are a form of free speech. So if I want you to be my president and I want to give you money to help you win the election, that is like a form of speech on my part, and it cannot be regulated. What I think we all agree on in the United States is that it should be transparent. So whether I give you $100 or I donate much more, if I'm allowed to, the public should know.
Yeah, there is a certain limit.
Even if there's no limit, some will argue there should be no limit.
Okay.
Because it's freedom of speech. But I think most Americans agree that whatever I give you as a politician, that should be disclosed so that people know that I'm one of your supporters, one of your donors, and they can judge, am I trying to influence you in an inappropriate way?
Is it something like a committee where you gather money on particular separate issues and you don't know exactly if this money goes to whom? in that way the political campaign may have another source of funding?
Well, that's a good question, because, you know, one thing we found is that every time you pass a new law or a new rule to limit this kind of stuff, sometimes new ways are found, and so we're always trying to update the system to try to make sure, at the very least, that there's transparency, that people know, because we hope that if people know, they will be able to make informed judgments about who they should vote for.
Well, I think that's the strength where in your country the democracy comes, where people discuss it, disclose it, and then debate it very hard, and then at the end they solve the issues. Recent things, what's happening now in America, and the riots, etc. I mean, how come that a certain part, I saw in Huffington Post some interviews, articles about, they even wrote a ghetto where people were neglected, interests were neglected in big riots. And how do you see, what is the solution of these issues?
Well, the solution, it's interesting, because I talk about these problems in my job all over the world. And I have to admit, when I go to other countries and I talk to them about human rights, that we haven't solved it all in the United States either. We have communities where there's still mistrust between the people living there and the police and the authorities. And that may be something that's impossible to eliminate altogether in any society. The feelings of mistrust between authorities who have guns and power and the ability to, as I said, take away your freedom, and people who are living in those places, especially poorer communities. And I would say the solution is making sure that we have the institutions that enable us to solve the problems as they arise. Can't eliminate those problems, can't be perfect, but do we have institutions like a free media that will expose the problem, so that if we have violence in a community in America, people in Mongolia see it. And of course, people in America are seeing it, and they're talking about it. So number one, I think we've got that. Do we have a democratic system that is responsive to the complaints of those people when they arise? And I think sometimes that system is very slow in responding, which is what makes people angry, but then it does respond. And when there's wrongdoing by the police, by other government officials, is there a way of independently holding them accountable? And that's what we're trying to do in some of these cases by having our federal judicial institutions step in, conduct their own investigations. And in the most recent case in Baltimore, we've now had the police officers who are at the center of the controversy there. They have now been indicted by the prosecutor, and a court will decide.
You know, I used to live in the US when I studied. I found that democracy is a long process everywhere. In particular, a country like Mongolia, which just starts a lot roads to go. You have been working for Human Rights Watch organization, and here I want to ask you a question about the role of the government. Here we try to, at least I try to convince the people that they have only three things to do: to protect human rights, life, and property. And that's it. That should be limited, not more than anything else. What do you think? What's your take on that?
I like the simplicity
Okay.
of that theory. I think protect and promote, because I think most citizens expect their government to do more than just protect what we have. They also expect government to help us grow what we have, to grow an economy, to build a better and stronger community. And you know, those expectations, well, let's say whatever expectations people have, the great thing about democracy is that it forces governments to listen. And it ensures that when government fails, and eventually all government officials falter and fail, that the system is renewed and refreshed all of the time, so that new ideas and new people come in and try new things. And I think that's something that is worth fighting for.
You have a very interesting career. In your bio, I saw you have been writing foreign policy speeches for President Clinton. What was the best speech you think was that you gave him?
The best?
Yeah.
You should ask President Clinton that question.
I understand, however.
Well, it was, I would say, I'll tell you the hardest speeches.
Okay.
I think speeches that involved war and peace, that involved decisions about whether and when to use our military, to use force to put peoples in harm's way.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's, I think any American president would tell you, those are the hardest decisions to make. And it is the duty of the president when he makes a decision like that to explain it, to justify it. And so when President Clinton had to make those decisions, I had to help him explain to the American people and to the world what we were doing. And I would say those were the most interesting, the hardest, and ultimately the most rewarding.
Well, my the final question is: you have been doing very interesting jobs, and today you are doing very important jobs for not only America, for many other countries who are pursuing democracy. And what does it take to be a politician? You politicians, right?
Well, I'm not an elected politician.
Public office.
Public office, yes, public official.
Well, at this level of public office, what you do as State Secretary, Assistant State Secretary, what does it take to be a young man, to be a politician, or to do the job of what you do?
Being able to work on
Yeah,
little
to
sleep.
have.
Especially when traveling to countries like Mongolia. Well, you've got to believe in what you're doing, because these are challenging jobs, and I think you have to, it's easy in any job that you do, whether you're an engineer or a professor or a doctor or a government official, to get so used to the job that you forget why you're doing it, why you started in the first place. And for me, well, I've got something in common with everybody in Mongolia who's older than 25.
What do you mean?
I was born in a communist country.
Oh, I see.
I was born in Poland, came to America as a small child.
Mm-hmm.
So I have those memories, and my family shares those memories with me. And so I have this idea in my mind of how people around the world who don't have all the freedom that they want look at my country, the United States, and what they expect of us. And they don't always like everything that we do in the world, and they're sometimes critical of us and think we get too big and arrogant sometimes, but then when they need help, generally they do look to the United States, because we're blessed with this wealth and power and influence, and we say that we want to use it for good around the world, and so they expect us to do what we say. And I think that knowledge reminds me of why all of us in our government, Ambassador Campbell, my boss John Kerry, my president, all of our colleagues, why we try to do our best in the jobs that we have.
Yeah, it's so important not only for your country, I think for many countries who are trying to build democracy, like Mongolia in particular. And I would like to thank you for your time coming here and being with us on this show.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. За хүн төлөвчтэй өнөөдөр де-фактоны төрийн зочноор Америкийн нэгдсэн улсын төрийн дэд нарийн бичгийн даргаар оролцлоо. Их баярлалаа.